There's a tendency to sometimes glorify the world of the past. I know in Age of Prophecy series, I'll often try to show exactly how incredible things were, or in different realms also how difficult they were. But I like to really show, okay, this was an incredible time. There were amazing things happening in the world that we don't necessarily have these days. But in today's daf, on daf 136 of Masechet Shabbat, of Tractate Shabbat in the Gemara, we get a very different reality in the old days. So what are we talking about at the time? We're talking about child viability. And now, every now and then, you'll hear about somebody who has a stillbirth or something along those lines. Nobody should know from it. But back then, we see like difficulties in childbirth were so much more common, to the point where we see that the Jewish law, it will treat a child that lived for, say, 15 days, 20 days, and passed away as often being a stillborn in terms of the legal implications. That if a child is born and dies a couple weeks later, it's almost considered like the child was never there, even though the child may have lived for a couple of weeks. And this is relevant because there are different laws that, such inheritance, such as what we call levirate marriage, what we call yibum, that change whether a person had a child or didn't have a child. So because infant mortality was so high, they'd actually treat those who are born for and lived for a short period of time as having not even existed. But then they goes into, in today's daf, some exceptions to that. Well, it points out, well, if a child is a couple weeks old and yawns and passes away, we're like, okay, that was a sign this child was not really fully capable of living independently. This child was not going to make it. We treat the child, if he didn't make it 30 days, as having really not been born according to Jewish law. And there's not even a mourning period on somebody who's just alive for a short period of time and then dies. But if the child dies an accidental death during that period of time, for instance, it gives the example of falling off a roof or getting eaten by a lion. Yes, the Gemara talks about a totally different reality when people had to fear about getting eaten by lions. Then at that point we say, okay, there's presumption that most people make it. Most kids do make it. And if it wasn't for this accident, then this child would have made it, presumably. And therefore, we're not going to allow the fact that an accident occurred to change the fact that the child would have made it. And so, and that's an instance when the child falls off a roof or gets eaten by a lion, that we would say that no, that was a viable child who faced an accident, as opposed to the child who yawns and passes away was considered to be someone who was not viable from the beginning and was just able to stay alive a little bit, but didn't really have the internal fortitude in order to live. And it's one of these times where I think it just really makes me grateful for the modern technology. As much as we're into alternative medicine and eating a different way and treating things that somewhat different, there's a lot of gifts that we have. And one of those is that ability that so many of us are able to be so healthy for so long, that so few children do get lost in that early stage. And it's a reminder, as much as we glorify the old days and there were a lot of amazing things back then, there were a lot of harsh realities that they dealt with that I'm grateful that we don't still have to deal with in our modern age.